what I'd like to talk about is filling the gaps, typological research and enhancing cyber safety and data. Ryan, you're tall. Well, I'm going to pull this down. So about 9 years ago, I took over and managed the corporate crimes team of the Organized Crime Enforcement Service in Toronto Police. And we were focused entirely on large-scale fraud and what have you. But what we also did was we wanted to go into proactive posture, and which is why I love these opportunities here, where we were looking at something almost completely different than what Ryan is talking about. That is moving into a proactive stance and leveraging all these social media and digital platforms that we can as law enforcement to, in criminological terms, to target harden our citizens and to maybe prevent more of what is happening at the other end of the crime spectrum, and to better inform people how we can help them. So I've read a lot of things coming out of Albert Einstein, but what I find ironic about a lot of his quotes, I think he really did see the world prefigured. Years and years down the road, he knew we were in for a lot of trouble because we can't manage technology. And I think I was here most of the day yesterday, and I have to confess I probably understood about 5% of what was being talked about. But it's terrifying, the state of things. So what I want to do is talk about identifying the needs for public law enforcement, and talk a little bit about, and Ryan touched on it, is building partnerships with the private sector and other government agencies to maybe look at the front end of cyber fraud and cyber crime much more thoughtfully than we already are. And I have to say we're doing well. There's a lot more that we can do. So in terms of identifying the need, when I was doing some graduate studies, I focused in on senior citizens. I love seniors. I have to confess, probably the second worst day of my life was when my dad asked to be friends on Facebook. That terrified me. I was 47, and I'm like, I need to take stuff off my account because my dad's here. I felt like I was 16. But the very worst day of my life was when my dad gave my mom access to his Facebook account, and she started posting baby pictures, not on his account, but on mine. Bear in mind, I'm a police officer, and I have 200 friends that are police officers that have access to my Facebook account. So I came into the station, and there was baby pictures all over my locker, the lunchroom, our detective office. There was one in my personnel file when I did my evaluation. My superintendent showed me the naked picture in the tub one. That was always good. But it really speaks to a higher, and I'm okay with it now, but it was really traumatic back then. But it speaks to a really big need that we have, and I wanted to focus in on seniors to kind of accentuate the point. And that is, when we look at seniors, and when I did some research, seniors are defined as people that are 65 years of age and older, which is, in essence, our baby boomer generation, which is a massive demographic within the Canadian landscape and also all over the world. And when you study baby boomers, you realize, number one, they're the wealthiest generation we've ever seen by percentages we've ever seen in the history of humankind. They are definitely the wealthiest. They're a huge demographic. And because of advances in modern medicine, they're living longer. They're actually working longer. And what we're going to see over the fullness of time over the next 2 decades and probably into 3 decades is, because a lot of a lot of baby boomers are going to live past 100, we're going to see the largest transfer of wealth from one generation to the following generations. But you intersect that with this generation is exploding onto the internet, onto social media sites. You look at Facebook really quickly, and this is where the problem happens. Facebook, in and of itself, is perfectly designed, whether it was intended or not, for seniors who might at some point become physically isolated, but they can still talk to their peers from their MacBook or their iPad, as my parents do. And I have to tell you, it's really hard raising parents in the new age. They don't listen. They stay out late. They move to places they shouldn't. I'm going to block my father on Facebook. I might actually do it from this computer. But when we look at this demographic, but I also want you to think about millennials. I'm Generation X, so I'm kind of in the middle of 2 very dominant generations. You look at monthly activity in terms of social media, Facebook being the largest platform, but Google, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Reddit, I'm basically parked on Facebook myself and LinkedIn, as some of you know. So in looking at seniors, a lot of governments have undertaken to do what we call internet usage surveys to see how different demographics are behaving. And the group that is of most note to at least Statistics Canada and also in Australia is how quickly they're exploding onto social media sites and other digital platforms. But what is terrifying to me as a former law enforcement officer, now into something slightly different, is how much and how quickly they're embracing things like e-commerce. My dad has an Amazon account, and there are packages showing up every day. Must be nice being retired. But I just saw an Amazon commercial this morning when I was getting ready where they're actually going to give you an Amazon lock on your door with a camera, and the truck shows up and they unlock your door and they throw the parcel into your house and they lock it again, all being videoed. That's not happening in my house. Anyway, so really, really interesting. So in terms of cyber fraud research, which is where I dove into with the help of some great people. So what I wanted to do was study the effectiveness of existing fraud prevention by police, which, to be quite honest, wasn't that good. And looking at conventional crime prevention versus digital prevention. What kind of things do the police have in terms of, we still do pamphlets. We don't do the auto dialers anymore. Does anyone remember those? Where your local station would call you with this generic message that there's a serial killer in your neighborhood, please be careful, and then they'd hang up. Oh my God. So what we've seen over the last probably 10 to 12 years is the police enhancement of digital platforms. And I did a scan again because it's of interest to me, but police have really, really pumped out and put some pretty impressive enhancements on their digital platforms. But then, to Ryan's thing, one of the things that I noticed was I was always making this commentary on kind of the general state of police cybercrime resources, which I like to call, they're basically their cyber maturity. Because how they investigate cybercrime, really there is a correlation to how much they prevent it at the other end on their websites and their social media platforms. And this one-size-fits-all prevention strategy that we saw in the last century really is not working. So what I did, I studied the effectiveness of online fraud prevention for seniors 65 plus, but for those that have kids that are millennials are a fascinating generation that is starting to dominate the workplace. Think about how they behave in digital spaces. Are they more careless? They're embracing it. The generation coming after millennials is, I think they're aliens. They have phones implanted on their hands. They start doing things on their phone at 8 and 9 years of age. So almost every police service in Canada has this prevention online for seniors. So what I did was mainly a qualitative but a slightly quantitative review of the problem and a major literature scan. And I ran a seniors focus group in Burlington. I had 4 meetings with a group of seniors that basically represented seniors in Canada in terms of gender and age and computer literacy. And I love doing it. I have to confess that running a seniors research group is like herding cats. Okay, we're going to start in 5 minutes, which is 20 minutes. Are there coffee and donuts? Yes. And then they would look at me and say, Cameron, you look very tired. So while I'm working full time and I'm doing my master's, so I'm slammed really bad. Oh, are you getting enough sleep? Do you eat properly? You don't smoke, do you? And I hope you don't drink a lot. And I'm trying to get this research focus group done, but it really spoke to kind of the generosity of this generation. We actually got into things. So I wanted to know if police did online fraud prevention, would it help them? And all of them said, no. If you send me an email and tell me to go to this website, I'm not clicking it because my grandkid told me not to. I'm like, yeah, but it's from us. How do I know it's from you? I'm told that don't trust anything on email. CRA always sends me emails. I always win these prizes, et cetera, et cetera. So they do present certain unique risks because they're exploding onto digital platforms. And how do we as police help target harden them? Because if you look at all these characteristics of they're the wealthiest generation, they're going to live long lives, they're exploding onto e-commerce, this is a recipe for cyber fraud disaster. And if I haven't alarmed anybody, maybe I'm not trying hard enough, but the tsunami isn't coming, it's now washing over that generation. And I think they're probably doing quite well. So I looked at computer literacy, I looked at their behavior when they're in digital spaces, and kind of used a routine activity theory for those crim grads in the group, and I know there's some But what I did is I applied a cyber lens to it. So, in criminology, we always talk about it has to happen in a place. And so we always think of a park, or you're walking home, or in your car, where we said, well, the place now is online. So that's not a big kind of stretch. And, in routine activity theory, you have to have a suitable victim, a motivated offender, and a lack of a suitable guardian. So in writing to this, a lack of a suitable guardian would be that you don't have the necessary programs on your computer to stop these phishing attacks or what have you. And then within those demographic trends, I wanted to talk about the issue of, and this impacts how police may better inform their constituents, is the concept of privacy. We see a lot of theft of personal information, or identity theft, whatever we want to call it, the explosion of synthetic identities. There was a MTO breach at the MTO office in Orangeville, Ontario. Organized crime had gone in and basically subverted most of the staff and created thousands of fake identities. You ask a senior about privacy, and they'll eloquently talk about how strictly they guard it. You ask a millennial or the next generation about privacy, and they're just like, there is none. And they'll do these selfies on Twitter. They'll hold up their brand new driver's license and say, I'm licensed to drive, with their name, their date of birth, their home address, and they've just given up their identity. Who cares what happened with Equifax? I really hope you're not in the room. Yeah, just the cyber lens routine activity theory. Wrapping it up really quickly. So at some point about 8 years ago, we created the Social Media Working Group on Financial Crime Prevention, which is a multidisciplinary, multi-agency effort. It's still running. On Thursday nights, if you go on Twitter and you go #FraudChat at about 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, there's still a program running about fraud prevention on Twitter, and this is run by the police and the Financial Services Commission of Ontario. But are we hitting the mark in terms of our constituents? Are we properly informing them about the dangers of living in the digital spaces now? Because more often than not, we're not walking through a park. A lot of us on break, we're on our phones. And that's basically out of necessity, because that's where lives are emerging more often than in physical places. But are we considering human traits enough in our focused crime prevention? I would not model cyber fraud prevention the same for a senior as I would a millennial, because research has shown in a lot of academic studies in the southern United States, in a number of universities, cyber awareness for millennials is huge, yet they still surf and engage very carelessly and have a different sense of privacy, where seniors, one of the funniest moments I had was, what would get you listening to cyber fraud prevention? And a guy who was 82, he actually taught computer literacy at a senior center, and he's amazing, knew more about computers than I did, simply said, if you type out a piece of paper that showed me all these links and gave me some tips, you put it in my tax return, and you mailed it to me once a year, when I file my taxes, I'll go to those sites. But if you email me, not a chance. And I thought that was phenomenal. That was so insightful, in that what are we doing in our digital spaces to teach them cyber fraud prevention? So this will allow you to find the balance between scarce resources and effectively deploying your resources as public law enforcement, because as Ryan has eloquently told us, this is just starting. I was at a technological summit, and the president and CEO of SimCorp said, this will not be an elegant race. This is a fight for survival. And I couldn't agree more. Lastly, what's next? I wish I'd gone on to do my PhD, but I was kind of slammed doing it. I just really didn't have the time at that point in my life. But more research into cybercrime and how we can leverage sociodemographic characteristics of unique generations and offer this segmented cyber fraud prevention. It really is the best way. If you give a millennial your slide deck for seniors, they're not going to read it. And if you give it to a millennial, you better say it in about a minute and a half, because they will not read it completely. But the future is here. Save for any questions later on. Thank you for your attention. And these are my contact information. This is still a space I live in. Really quickly, we're focused now at BMO and the other 4 FIs into leveraging strategies for human trafficking and fentanyl interdiction. So please reach out. Thank you very much.